Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a really interesting conversation and guest with Kateryna Lee. Kateryna, you are a fractional CMO. You specialize in B2B SaaS. You've done everything from ad tech to health tech, HR tech, fintech, all the techs, right? And so you've got a very vast array of experience. And especially as a fractional CMO, you've gotten into a lot of different companies, seen a lot of different perspectives, gained a lot of different insights. And we're going to pull that all together. And our topic today is CMOs, what is conversion rate marketing? And how is that different and unique? And what do we need to know? But before we dive into conversion rate marketing, I'd love to maybe ask you to just expand a little bit on your background before we get started.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Steve, for having me, first of all. And yeah, like you've already said, I have 12 years total working in tech. And for the last 8 years, I've been working independently as a B2B SaaS consultant, primarily as a fractional CMO, head of digital marketing. I typically step in, either build the marketing team from the ground up or take over what the company is currently working with. And my primary goals are generally to expand the strategic pipeline and to improve predictable revenue, because that's what most B2B SaaS companies are looking for by the end of the day. Right now, I'm working with one of the largest enterprise libraries for healthcare and pharma NLP libraries, and that's where I have the majority of my experience with healthcare and pharma.
Thank you. Let's take that background, and you've got a particularly unique perspective on conversion rate marketing. So I'm going to ask you just to maybe start out with what a definition in your mind is conversion rate marketing.
Yeah, so I want to make a bit of a distinction, because I think most marketers, when we hear conversion rate, we think a landing page and how we optimize it. And while people are not signing up for a certain thing, what we are talking about here is the conversion rate in your funnel. So when you have a leaky, quote unquote, sales funnel, and the conversion rate between the steps, or if you're a fan of flywheel model, whatever you prefer, what are we looking at? What kind of numbers are we looking at when we're talking the transition between an MQL to an SQL to an opportunity and so on? So we're talking about that conversion rate between the stages. So in a nutshell, conversion rate marketing, it's focusing on moving people through the funnel instead of just acquiring new leads through the top of the funnel. And it's not to say you can do both at the same time, but today we'll be talking about how, some people say you're richer than you think. Well, you actually have more leads and more opportunities for your pipeline than you think. It's just sitting in your funnel.
I love it. And I know from our previous conversation, there is absolute gold in that data, that conversion data. We typically think of conversion right into a deal, right? That's the conversion. But there's all kinds of phenomenal information, learning, insights, decision-making opportunities if we start looking at conversions all along the funnel. And I think that's one of the keys that I took away from our first conversation. But if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to talk. You mentioned something about the power of 1%. And I think it relates directly to what we were just talking about in terms of looking at all these different conversion points. What did you mean by the power of 1%?
Sure. So, how it usually happens, beginning of the year, end of Q4, you're looking at your performance as a company. And as long as, let's say, you generated X number of new MQLs as a marketing team, and you have that much revenue and everything's going smoothly, people are happy, and nobody generally looks at what was happening in between unless you don't hit those revenue targets. If you start looking how your leads are moving from stage to stage, this is when you realize, oh, I have, let's say, 13% conversion rate from MQL to SQL. I looked up, just for a conversation, a benchmark, and it's around 15% for B2B SaaS. So, definitely lots of room for improvement there. So imagine that you could improve your MQL to SQL conversion rate, let's say, by just 1%. What would that mean for your pipeline and for your revenue at the end of the day? If we're talking, let's say, your goal is 5,000 MQLs and you can move 15% through the funnel. Well, how much would that be? 750? Let's see if I did the math correctly. Yes, I did. I think. So imagine if just 1% of that could be improved. Well, that's roughly what, 8 MQLs?
Right.
Am I counting correctly? Yes, I think so. So if out of those 8 MQLs, one became a sales qualified lead and opportunity, there is a pretty good chance one of those leads could cover some of your marketing budget for the next year, which I have a specific story on. So when you think about your daily, weekly, monthly improvement, we're thinking, oh, 10%, 15%, and that would be amazing. But if you could just narrow it down to 1% and then do some math, you can have more impact on that predictable revenue and pipeline than you think.
And this is the way I think about this too, is we think more and more about the more strategy. In other words, if I could I'll fix everything if I get more MQLs, because that'll be more SQLs and it'll all go down. Or in a sales perspective, I just need more quota carriers, right? If I get more quota carriers in here, I'm going to close more business. But you've worked really hard at creating this pipeline. And we should be working equally as hard about filling that pipeline as we are at moving it from one stage to the next. And that's
Yes.
what you're saying here is let's take resources that it takes a lot to get MQLs these days. Only 3% of our audience in the B2B world even fills out forms. That's only one form of an MQL, but that's an example. It's hard to do. It's harder to get more MQLs than it is to move 1% more of the MQLs you have to the next stage.
Yes.
So that's what you're saying is like you have more leads than you realize.
Exactly. Like you're richer than you think. You have more leads than you realize. It's like, how your mom would probably tell you, oh, if you didn't spend $5 at Starbucks every week and you would have invested it, you know how much you would actually make. And it's kind of similar. If instead of putting, all the time and effort into new channels, which, for me, typically working with clients, we do it hand in hand. We are setting new goals for MQLs. We do want to reach more people every year, but at the same time, it will not make a lot of sense that all of your hard work is lost in that transition. And this is when, the three things come into play. It's technology, processes, and people, which we can talk about in a little more detail, but you have to have those three things in place to improve that mid funnel between the stage conversion.
Now, you said you had a story about this. I'd love to hear what that story is.
Yeah, so I am a big proponent of don't break what works. When it comes to introducing new channels to marketing, I heavily rely on certain channels that really work well for me in B2B sets. And one of those channels is LinkedIn and email. I know it sounds very boring, nothing flashy, but I do have a story where it was one of those times when I try to convey to the sales team, which we can also talk about the sales and marketing alignment, that we need to be very persistent in our outreach to the leads that we're getting from LinkedIn, because I can see how much we're paying for those leads. And for me to get my ROI and for us as a team to get the ROI, we need to be persistent. So I converted a lead through a campaign. It was a demo request. The demo never actually happened. So the sales team were trying to reach and set up the demo. It never converted. And that was in April. So after the sales team tried and tried, they just handed the lead back to me for the marketing nurture, which I'm always happy to do. And I did set up a nurture of 4 to 5 emails. And at the end of that nurture, that MQL, that was an MQL, not yet qualified, finally booked a demo and turned into an opportunity that if I were to look at just that opportunity alone, it could cover my whole LinkedIn ad budget for the next year. So what that story is teaching us is that, well, in B2B SaaS, no surprise, sales cycles are long. So get patient and create content to keep people engaged through it while they are in that stage in your funnel. They can be there for months. Who knows? Just, gear up, be patient, and don't give up on your outreach. And what I could have done, I could have looked at my funnel and being like, well, I need to diversify. I need to go and pursue more channels instead of thinking, what can I do to get this person to actually talk to me, not just sit there and be a dormant, which I like to call them dormant MQLs. So I, as a marketer, on a more optimistic side, I'm saying, unless you absolutely opted out and you never want to hear from me ever again, you're just stuck in the funnel. So I'm going to find a way to get to you and move you to the next stage.
You're just not accepting the fact
No.
that they didn't convert, because too often, and this is what's interesting. I love that because you talked about the alignment between sales and marketing. A lot of the times, what would happen from sales is they just give up. It's not like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm going to throw it back over the wall to do a nurture. It's like, no, that wasn't a good lead. We're moving on.
Mhm.
So what you express there is just because somebody doesn't sign up for the demo, doesn't convert, doesn't turn into an SQL, right, doesn't mean that they're a bad lead, right? So many organizations look at that, and this is
Mhm.
that moving them from stage to stage. You're saying, okay, if they didn't move right away on our time, right, because that was our timeline, maybe
Mhm.
there's a different timeline. Maybe something happened, right? And let's just be patient. Let's put them back into a nurture strategy. Let's not give up. Too many times, organizations work too hard to get leads into the funnel, and then we give up too quickly.
Yes, and I do want to mention a little bit there. You mentioned the sales team. Uh, this is like a never-ending story. I think for any B2B SaaS business is sales and marketing aren't always aligned, and there is a lot of finger pointing, meaning the sales say the quality of the leads you provided is not good, but the marketing says you're just not persistent enough. So what I found is very important is to establish that alignment and develop some shared KPIs. So, we're used to thinking MQLs is a marketing KPI, SQL is a sales KPI, and we just work in a vacuum and, try to get try to hit our KPIs, and nobody really cares about the bottom line. That kind of uh, almost like toxicity, like you let that creep in. I find that for most people, when they think of work, it's not hard, to draft an email and send it to somebody. It's that people part of work that becomes a little more challenging. So you shouldn't allow that to creep into your day to day between sales and marketing. This kind of who gets credit for something good or bad. So when I'm saying shared KPIs, that means that you both, as two departments, or just define one stakeholder in each department, you will be held accountable for that KPI. So in my case, what I found helpful is to take that MQL to SQL conversion rate and make that a shared KPI. So you, as a sales team, you need to fill in the pipeline. I get it, and this is where I'm going to help you. But when we're going to be looking at how the leads are moving, now all of a sudden we're not finger pointing and we're thinking, okay, what can we do together to get them through the pipeline? And it doesn't end there, because when it comes to, let's say, renewals, this is where marketing works together with customer success team, and you have that as a shared KPI. So there's plenty of little interactions in the funnel that you can team around with the sales team as a marketing team.
I love it. I want to dig deeper into the area that you and I have now both touched on, which is this alignment, right,
Yeah.
between sales and marketing. And if there's a co-ownership, how does that work? Like a co-ownership because if there's two different groups that own the same KPI and
Mhm.
that KPI is going down, in the end, who's responsible? How does that co-ownership work? I'm really interested to hear kind of how you work together to own that.
Yeah, I think what is the most helpful is, of course, you can, hold like entire group accountable because somebody has to step up. In my experience, it's usually head of marketing and head of sales, and it kind of drips down from there. What I found helpful is, and it's more of a practical ABM type approach. You can tier your accounts based on these 10 accounts that are in the pipeline, we would just die to work with. And for those accounts, you create one-to-one personalization, which, you can get too far with just email templates that are generic and work for everybody. And for those accounts, I usually say to my sales team that I don't have a luxury of one-on-one personalization all the time because I am marketing at scale. Well, you guys, this is if for that one-on-one communication, I'm going to create sales enablement content for you, and that can be your realm of responsibility. Then we're talking about tier 2 accounts, let's say, series B, and for those, I'll take over them, and I can personalize to my best ability, but still reach out at scale. So when you come together and you try to divide and conquer. Then at the end of the day, when you're speaking to your CEO, sure, I'll be responsible for the MQLs. The head of sales will be responsible for SQL. But when we're talking about that conversion rate, there shouldn't be any finger pointing in that moment because, well, we've been working on that together. I would say, just like when you would look at the revenue as a company, if you are in a healthy work environment, you have that as a shared success, right? So that would be the same way you would look at this shared KPI as a shared success of your entire team.
I love it. So there's shared success, but there's still specific roles and responsibilities within that shared success.
Mhm.
Uh, and what I love is when you're, like you said, you're in front of the CEO, right? That's where lots of times the misalignment between marketing and sales falls apart, right? Because if you haven't hit the KPI, the natural inclination is as humans is we're like, not my fault,
Yeah.
right? But if you co-own it, then you co-own the solution to it as well. I
Mhm.
think that's the thing there. So tell me about this funnel, and I want to learn more about how you fix areas of the funnel that you're seeing that the conversions aren't what they should be. And then also there's, with a funnel, we're always looking for new channels, right?
Yes.
So how do you view those and balance those? Because
Mhm.
you're one group, you're one budget, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so I will start with the new channels just because that speaks to the usually top of the funnel, the acquisition part. And I've seen that many, many times, especially working with CEOs. CEOs are on top of new things. And a lot of times they would come to you and say, look, remember when Clubhouse was like a thing, right? And they would say, oh, we have to get on Clubhouse.
Right.
And I'm thinking, do we? Do we have to get on Clubhouse? Because they have these, let's say, Google Display Landing campaigns running and unplanned communication campaigns working pretty well. Like, do we need to get into the Clubhouse? So I noticed that the CEOs, because it's just their nature, they're so entrepreneurial and they always look for new things to try. Just you as a CMO have to almost bring them down to earth sometimes and say, look, Clubhouse is great, but we have these channels that we can scale and we will know for sure that they will give us more leads. So we don't want to diversify for the sake of diversification, right? We want to diversify if we want to maybe attract new audiences or better quality leads. So it's not always, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea if you will implement a new channel for your customer acquisition. And then when we look at the funnel, for different people looks differently, but I guess the most standard one is, where you have this awareness, consideration, decision stage, and people can be in one stage for months and then move to another one in a matter of weeks or days. But we're looking at, your typical stages of life cycle stages would be, you move from a lead to an MQL, to an SQL, opportunity, and a customer. And again, for every client out there may look different for a different industry, but that's what I'm the most familiar with. That's what I generally see on a day-to-day basis. And for you to understand those, like the leaks, it's pretty straightforward. You just need the right technology in place, and you visualize your funnel, and you see where you have the most, where you have the largest percent of conversion rate, and you can learn from that. And where you have the smallest, well, that's where you need improvements. It's not a rocket science. That it's not that hard to, it's not that hard to understand as a concept, but it can be challenging to sometimes just to visualize it and to understand, oh, this is why I have this leak. And the leak a lot of times happens if we're talking about the early stage of the funnel. You're not getting enough people in. You may not be doing the right type of ICP marketing. You're targeting the wrong personas, the wrong messaging. From my experience, once people are in the funnel, the main reason they're not converting is lack of personalization. You are trying to automate as much as you can, and that's great. But there are certain things you have to sacrifice automation for the sake of personalization. And that's, in my experience, why some people are stuck. They just don't get incentivized enough to move forward. They're getting these, let's say, newsletters from you but talking about the industry trends, but nothing talks about their company, their use case, or their title. And this is when I'm sitting down with the sales team trying to prioritize, okay, you guys take over these and research the person, and I will take over these and maybe try to get their attention with some company level personalization or something like that. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And the personalization part is always the hardest part, right? And we try to automate everything. We try to automate personalization, but what I want to make sure that we have time to talk about is an area where we're all supposed to be extremely data-driven CMOs, right? We're supposed to be very, very data-driven these days, as much as pipeline-driven.
Yeah.
And we have lots of attribution data. You've got lots of conversion data.
Mhm.
How do you look at that? How do you balance that? What's more meaningful? How do you use attribution versus conversion rate metrics and data?
So to answer the question right off the bat, conversion data is more important to me. The attribution data, it is important as well, but we don't live in an ideal B2B SaaS funnel world, unfortunately, where you can see, oh, my lead had 5 touch points, and after 5 touch points from these channels, he moved into the next stage. And a lot of times, if you start doing the drill down of sources, let's say, where all the leads are coming from, and I do that quite a bit, of course, to understand where to put the money. But that's just such a fragment of the answer to why did they convert. And when you look at the funnel to funnel movement of that, or stage to stage movement in the funnel of that lead, this is where you can see more like of a holistic journey, like the combination of different touch points that drove that made them take us one step further. So attribution is great, and whatever model you're following, if you want to do the last click attribution, well, I don't recommend, but you can certainly do that. I recommend to look at or the first click attribution, right? When you say, oh, all of my leads come from LinkedIn, so that's where we need to prioritize. But how are those leads that are coming from LinkedIn actually moving through the funnel? Because it's not enough just to say that because of my attribution, I can see that most of my leads are coming from this channel, so I just put it on, on the pedestal, and that's it. No, you have to look at how are those leads actually converting. What does conversion rate tell you about that channel and that attribution? So it's and I don't like the word balance very much, just because it's kind of a personal thing, I guess. But it is the balance of those that you require. However, when we talk to CEOs trying to sell them new marketing plans, and by sell I mean like sell an idea, right? You sell them on something. The conversion rate data I find is more convincing.
Well, it should be, right?
Yeah.
Everything you just talked about there, right? I mean, and so the alignment that we talked about earlier, there's not only alignment with sales, there's alignment with your CFO, there's alignment with the CEO, right? There's alignment if there's a chief customer officer. All of that is really important. And we're all very, very metric driven, right?
Yeah.
And most often, CEOs can be very short-term metric driven because they're looking back at the board and the board's asking them, how are we on the quota this month or this
Mhm.
quarter? How are we looking for next quarter? So your CRO, your CEO, they have a very large short-term focus. They're going to understand branding and long-term development. In fact, a CEO or a three-time B2B CMO said, today's brand is tomorrow's demand. And
Yeah,
I fully believe in that. But
sure.
these conversion metrics talk more to short term, like where are we in the pipeline and how are we at pushing through the pipeline? So
Mm.
I could see how they would be much more meaningful to a CEO, or a
Yeah.
CRO as well.
And to add to that, I guess your job as a CMO is to alleviate partially your CEO from all of those, all of the complexity of every single metric. You of course every day look at things like what's my click through rate and how much am I paying for a lead and all of that. But when you talk to your CEO, I think one of the jobs, quote unquote, that you have is to just laser focus them on the most important thing. And when we're talking about conversion rate, I think that 1% is a good example to give them. If you, let's say, are pitching to them a campaign not to acquire new leads, which is something they probably want, you can tell them, look, I'm going to run this campaign. Let's say it's a retargeting campaign and I need this much budget for it. Or I'm allocating this much budget. And then they will probably say to you, well, you're not getting any new people in. And then you can tell them, well, how about we convert 1% more into SQLs and opportunities? What will that mean for you? So, yeah, just in a nutshell, uh, don't burden them with all of the metrics that you as a CMO hold in your head. That's your part of your job to help them out. To not worry about that. To take at least one hat off their head. And focus them on the bottom line and how this conversion marketing impacts that.
I love the idea of this 1% too, because it's a great goal to give a team.
Mm.
It's like, hey, team, here's your goal.
Yeah.
I need a 1% conversion rate increase here or
Mhm.
here. And then the team's thinking about optimizing that, right?
Yeah.
Versus we need more dollars. That's to put in. We need to expand our budget. And now you're not the CMO going to the CFO and the CEO saying, here is our only solution. You want more revenue, give me more budget, and I can do a lot more with it. That
Mhm.
that obviously has correlation, right? But if you're constantly looking for ways to optimize and do this conversion rate marketing, not only does it impact your ability to be a partner with your CEO and your CFO, and they see that you're trying to do the absolute most with the budget that you're given, but it also gives tactical marching orders to the team as well, right?
Yeah, and that's a good example of the SMART goal, right? As if you put a timeline on it, because it's attainable, you can see it's very specific, it has a number to it. And the best thing is, like, usually when you pitch something like that to the team, they say like 1%, I can do that. It
Right.
doesn't sound like that much of a change, because if we're talking about MQL year over year, we're usually talking like 10, 20, 30%. But here, when it's 1%, I can take that, and it's
Right.
and it's a good goal also for the sales team. Not just the marketing team, but the sales team. So overall, yeah, it's just a very healthy approach that can help you make the most out of all of that hard work you put into acquiring the leads that are now just sitting in your funnel, dormant, needing one little nudge from you.
So I know we could go on and talk, but what's out of everything that we've talked about so far,
Mhm.
what's the one thing that you would want people that are listening in or viewing to know and remember as a result of this podcast?
Good question. I guess you remember that as a CMO, and of course, we're not talking about the early stage companies who don't have a funnel yet, and it sounds like a good problem to have a broken funnel to fix. But I think you're doing a better job than you think. When you think in terms of I'm not having any good leads, dig deeper into your funnel and look how many MQLs you have that are just sitting there, how many SQLs you have that now are reverted back to MQLs that can be re-engaged. Just try to be more optimistic about your funnel, I guess, and believe that all the hard work you put into demand gen and customer acquisition will be paid off. You just have to see where to give that little nudge to this or that segment of people. So overall, yeah, just be a little more optimistic about your funnel. It has more pipeline and revenue potential than you may think.
Your glass in your funnel is half full, not half empty.
That's right.
Right?
Your funnel is half full.
Well, if people have additional questions they'd like to ask you, is it appropriate that we give out the link to your LinkedIn profile so people could reach you?
Yeah, for sure. And I also just launched like a very straightforward website where you can reach me as well. It's kdigital.io. So you can go there and get in touch with me there or reach me on LinkedIn. Yeah, anytime.
Fantastic. Well, Kateryna, thank you so much for coming in and giving us the belief in our own funnels. That's my takeaway, right? It's not as bad as we think it is. So I appreciate it, really.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve.